moving forward, the topic I was asked to talk about today was ending the weeds winning streak. There's increasing reports of resistance that we're getting coming through the press. Everybody's talking about blackgrass resistance. There's ryegrass, wild oat resistance out there. And also with herbicides, the ALS inhibitors, you're talking about poppies, mayweeds, and chickweeds also being reported. So it's an ever-increasing problem. We just cannot rely on ALS inhibitors any longer. That's a message coming out with the press weekly. So when we're trying to end the weeds winning streak, we also have to see the impact of the chemically dependent system has on our soil structures and how that then interacts with the way that it helps weeds develop within our systems. So what I'd like to try and cover in the time I've got today is try and explain the problem with the weeds, the chemical and cultural control options that we may have, the crop competition, the role that would play, germination and dormancy, a key thing about soil structure, and the impact of the chemicals that we're using on soil biota. So it's quite a bit to get through, but hopefully I won't lose anyone. Just to set things off, if we look at the blackgrass argument, which is on everybody's tongues at the moment, and it is a bit of a numbers game. Just read the figures there, 2 to 20 heads per plant, 100 seeds per head. It doesn't take long till you get to a situation that 12 plants per metre squared can cause 5% yield loss in wheat. Startling statistics. And control of blackgrass populations now reported that 1 plant per metre squared may be justified in high-risk situations. So agronomists out there and farmers out there that see this blackgrass are saying we have to get control of this beast because it's resistant or becoming resistant and it's not profiting us. Blackgrass control measures currently exist of the herbicide range, ACAS, FOPs, DIMs, DENs. We've all probably heard of them if you're in the conventional industry. But more commonly now, there's an emphasis on pre-cultivation techniques with the use of things like glyphosate. But we're getting people using this 1, 2, 3, 4, many times as pre-cultivation techniques. They follow that up with pre-emergence herbicides of the range that you see there, and post-emergence herbicides. So you're doing pre-cultivation, you're doing pre-emergence, and then you're using post. That's a whole array of pesticides or herbicides that you're using on these soils. And it's no wonder that we're getting sort of instances of herbicide resistance coming from that. To the point, HGCA put this out in publications, multiple herbicide resistance now occurs on virtually all farms. No new herbicides are likely to be available, and some existing herbicides may be withdrawn. So it's not a good formula moving forward. So the answer for most agronomists out there is chemical stacking. Let's put 2 of these chemicals together, make them a bit stronger from 2 different groups, both at full rates. That's no harm, that should control a blackgrass. But if you've still got 500 seeds per metre squared, it'd be an awful good chemical to control more than 99% control of these weeds. So that still leaves 5 seeds per metre squared, 20 heads, 100 seeds per head. The problem is going to go on. So chemicals isn't the solution to the problems that we're having with weeds and weed resistance on our farms. Not the total solution anyway. So within in the bodies, we've got to look at cultural control. And that's basically using anything that you can to not use a herbicide to help our end. So ploughing's been talked about to bury these seeds down, delayed autumn drilling, higher seed rates, spring cropping. There's lots of different ways that we can look or encompass the cultural control methods. This was taken from a HGCA site. And as you can see there, description here, 1,000 seeds. They started 1,000 seeds. But the percentage that you see reported often are just percentages of the previous treatment. So 88% control on ploughing, but then only 31% of the increase on the ploughing by the use of delayed drilling. So even if you use all these measures, you're still left with a few seeds in your soil, even after the herbicides at the end. So the answer to some people is, oh, let's go out and cut these things with a mower. Let's use this as an example of a CTM weed surfer. They're basically just driving through the wheat when in June or July, when the blackgrass is in head before it's matured, and just topping it when it's above the wheat crop, if that ever exists. Another approach that people are using, which is alarming me this last year, is a common practice over in Lincolnshire, is to spray at growth stage 59 with glyphosate, basically kill your crop off. And they're not going to harvest that as a wheat crop. There's no seeds going to come from that, but better that than have all that blackgrass, they say. Do we think that's acceptable? It just cannot be the way forward, surely. That we've got to this state in the situation in our industry that we just have a weed problem out of control, so let's just kill the crop off. We might as well have left it fallow, and you wouldn't have had the cost. So, crop competition plays a vital role in how we can prevent blackgrass populations. And there's a number of things that I'll run through just here. But crop competition, if you plant your seeds at different depths, that tends to be what you have happening. So the picture on the left is planted at the correct depth, and as you go deeper and deeper, you'll get a delayed germination. And as you delay the germination, you're limiting the photosynthetic time that that plant has to develop through the winter period. Therefore, ground cover comes into play. You restrict the amount of tillers. And we often see the picture on the right there, the plant on the right, from direct drilling systems, where they're putting it in the ground. But often they don't adjust the springs, so on different soil types across the farm, from a clay to a sand, they won't have adjusted the drill. So some places it will be drilling a lot deeper than other parts of the field. So it's attention to detail can make all the difference in crop competition. We also have a look at varietal differences. If you're not familiar with it, then varieties, some of them are broad-leaved with big floppy leaves, and some of them are quite erect. And those are the technical names for it. But the choice of variety means it will stop the sunlight getting down to the ground. It can block off that element of light for germination. So it restricts germination of weed seeds underneath the canopy. So some people start debating culture techniques in terms of the germination of the blackgrass. How about if we increase the blackgrass germination so we can spray it with our nasty glyphosates? Or should we be increasing the dormancy of that blackgrass, make it go to sleep, so therefore it won't germinate and a crop can get more competition? So that's a bit of a yin-yang debate there. But blackgrass dormancy is linked to temperatures late June and July. Hot weather gives very low dormancy and high germination, and cool temperatures through June and July do the opposite, high dormancy and low germination. That's one aspect to it. But one thing's for sure, if you add air to our soils, it goes through that biological process that Elaine was talking about earlier on. And the result of that is CO2 release. And it's been reported by Baskin in 98 that CO2 increases germination of seeds. It's a vital part to play in our soils. Again, if you look at your wood burner, when you open the vents of your wood burner, you increase the air intake. So you're going to increase the burning rate, the speed of burning, you increase the CO2 output. So things burn faster. Now, it's a bit of a debate here about trying to trap carbon into our soils, carbon sequestration, but we're referring to germination here. So if you take this picture, this was one of my farms in Bridgewater that I had to contend with. The picture was taken in blackgrass in April. Heavy shrinking clay soils, high magnesium, high calcium soil, wet and cold. This soil has had everything I said previously. It's had the pre-cultivation techniques. It's had the pre-emergent herbicide. It's had the ALS inhibitor, post-emergent herbicides. Yet, look at the blackgrass coming out of those cracks. Dormant seedlings were just sat there waiting for the air to breathe, waiting for this oxygen to come in, for the CO2 release to happen, for germination to occur. And that was the result coming out of those cracks. But we also get this if you create a very cloddy seed bed with blackgrass seeds within the clods. As soon as those clods dry or something causes those clods to break, again, later in the year, you're going to get a flush of blackgrass seeds. So are we talking truly about resistance of blackgrass here, or just poor soil management when we talk about our weeds? Now, this can be related to any type of weed. It's the same principle, but the example I've used is the blackgrass here. Blackgrass is a marsh weed. It loves anaerobic soils. It promotes its dormancy, though, so it can hang around longer. If we increase CO2, increase the levels of this atmospheric CO2, as we're talking about, global warming, we can promote seed germination. We can promote that break of the dormancy, which we then could potentially take out with cultural control methods. If you reduce the CO2, you increase the dormancy of the seed. Now, min-till, 5 times less CO2 released due to less cultivation. Wet, cold, anaerobic soils increase dormancy of blackgrass and marsh weeds. It's a fact. Take that a little step further forward, 74% per year reduction in longevity if you bury the seeds. Greater than 3 inches though. But you can still get a 20 to 30% survival rate per year, so you're still left with 1 to 3% viable seeds after a 3-year program. So maybe if we left the farm fallow, but that's non-productive. So that's not necessarily the answer, is it? So every time you move the soil, we get this CO2 release. Direct drilling releases 2.85 tons less CO2 per hectare than conventional tillage. And the plough-based system releases 5 times less CO2 in the 19 days after establishment. So when we're talking about trapping carbon in our soils, min-till would be the right technique. We're trapping that carbon. But carbon trapped in our soil promotes dormancy. CO2 is an important plant food. As you can see here, between C3, C4 grass types, C3 is all our wheats, basically, and our UK grasses. We're all C3 in the UK. And CO2, parts per million, is very important for growth. We need it. So as we get global warming, we will get accentuated growth, or speedier growth. So again, trapping that CO2, reducing CO2, is going to have an effect on germination. If we take photosynthesis, we take basic water, add it to light. Water and light makes chemical energy. Chemical energy plus CO2 creates our sugar. And is it strange that the leaves generally fold over and you have the stomata on the underside of the leaf? And that's there generally to catch the CO2 as it's been giving off from the soil. That's the most efficient way for that plant to access CO2, so it can produce these sugars. And if you were here for the previous lecture from Elaine, she mentioned about feeding soil bacteria and biology with sugars. That's how a plant tries to do it, and it does it by having this release of CO2. Not a flashy picture, but the rhizosphere that Elaine talked about. There's the root in the center of that tube, hydrogen carbon being given off, but you've got the mycorrhizal hyphae, the bacteria, all living in this area. It's a vitally important part of that plant, and we have to feed it. Dr. Obrecht, renowned professor who we tend to follow quite well, uses this sort of analogy. If you use the correct chemistry, build as closely as possible the correct physical structure, which in turn supplies the proper environment for the biology and worms and microbes. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. I mean, do you start with biology, just pouring biology all over the soil? Will that change your soil to be perfect? Or is there a bit of other things there that we need to think about? And certainly I'm a believer that the physical chemical properties also have a big part to play. So we're looking for this soil that has air and water movement. It's nicely aggregated. Things can happen, roots can penetrate. We're not looking for a compacted situation where it can produce an anaerobic situation. Water can't infiltrate, air can't get down there, and certainly roots can't grow. And we have to think about the soil chemical restrictions here. So, a lot of things to play in structure of soil. And if you get flooding of waters from seawater, or you get a water table coming up with salt in it, you get this salt crystallization. It's a high sodium problem. You also get a high iron problem. Down in the southwest where I live, lots of red soils, dominated by iron. And as iron oxidizes on the root surface, as air comes into the soil, it'll oxidize that iron. And effectively, that kills the root fibers. Those little fine filament hairs on the roots, the villi as we call it, that are there to suck up all the nutrition, and where the rhizosphere survives is being affected just by having too much iron in the soil. High magnesium makes the soil go cold, wet, and tight. And that's a calcium-magnesium soil. This soil was so tight, you could throw your trowel at it, and it bounced back at me. It was perfect before you ploughed it. It was a nice, well-worked soil. The farmer decided to put the plough in. The sun came out, baked it. Can't get a seedbed out of that now. So all those seeds are trapped within that clod just by one simple error of judgment, as I would say it, for the way that this soil was treated. So soil chemicals have a factor to play. We have to look at those soils in terms of their bulk density as well. If we measure true bulk density, with a little gadget, You know, we use this, it's just a tube, whack it in the ground, and then you weigh it and dry it and weigh it. You can work out your bulk density of your soil. So when we look at this across a range of fields, you can decide at different depths, 3 centimeters, 10 centimeters, whatever the depth you choose to use, what's happening with my bulk density? Is it sufficient for my roots to penetrate through there? Has my soil got anaerobic conditions? Because at 1.5 to 1.6, worms don't like that at all. They can't get through that. And 1.4 and above tends to restrict the roots. So it's a direct measurement we can do just with a metal tube. We're looking for this air, O2, oxygen, warmer, looser soils, aerobic bacteria and fungi, ideal seedbed for germination, opposed to this anaerobic, deoxygenated soil. There's little or no air, little or no O2, colder, tighter, no fungi. Fungi can't live in a flooded environment. They have to live in an aerobic environment. And as you heard previous speaker, the fungi are important to our soil biology. So we might think the min-till's the be-all and end-all. Well, this is a no-till situation, great for leaving our soil and not damaging it too much with cultivation. But if you're in a blackgrass grower and you had this, I mean, how much chemical is going to be absorbed by that straw? How much warmth and sunlight can get down onto the soil to create germination of seeds? And you're lacking that direct contact of herbicide with the soil. I appreciate a majority of you might not be using herbicides, but if you follow the theme, it's not good for encouraging germination. Composed to a ploughed system or a well-cultivated system. It doesn't have to be ploughed, it could be a non-inversion as long as you're moving soil in a good way, which gets these aggregates and gets a cleaner surface. Again, may fly in the convention of trapping carbon, but the same organic matter has gone back into these two soils. Now, some work we've been doing alongside a company is looking at the difference between no-till and plough-based systems. What we did here was to look at the top 10 centimeters of a soil, of both systems. They've been down for 10 years. And then we measured the bottom 10 centimeters. And we sent them away for full soil analysis, including the total nutrient elements within these soils. And we came back with figures of 79% calcium and 11% magnesium in the no-till in the top 10 centimeters, and an average of 71 to 16 in the plough-based system. But what was really interesting, you almost see it in the color of the aggregates there and the size of them, is that just 10 centimeters and beyond in the no-till situation, we had a very different soil, a 62, 18%. The calcium and the magnesium were different. The magnesium was much higher. So we can look at a field and think we've got one field, but we could all probably have two different soils in the same field, just 10 centimeters lower than where we're looking. So it's about getting our spades out and seeing what's happening in our fields. What impact might this have? Well, if you think about nutrient availability in soil and soil chemistry, the manganese in the no-till situation, the one I showed you just a second ago, was very good in the top 10 centimeters, but almost negligible in the bottom 10 centimeters. So it poses us to think, against the plough, where it was average, we had manganese availability, very good manganese availability throughout. What could be the difference? One thing we forget, if you ever did chemistry at school, is a little word called redox, reduction and oxidization of soils. It's a scientific thing, but it's how a soil chemical element swaps electrons. It's a chemical reaction that is fact within soil. Manganese plus 2, manganese plus 4. Plant can only drink one form. So as it changes that electron to do with soil chemistry and oxidization, we need air in our soils. The higher reading in the top 10 centimeters because we had a lot more air there. So it's indicating we've got anaerobic conditions here where we're not getting redox working. So there's a lot of science behind chemistry. It's not just bugs, as well as it has to be chemistry as well. So if we look at our plant roots and think that we want these to go down 2-3 meters in an ideal situation, well, there's our 10 centimeter line. So if you've got restricted roots, or restricted soil at 10 centimeters, there's not a lot going to happen. You're restricting the way that plant can grow. And there's our 20 centimeter line. So just by taking out a measurement tool like the metal tube, we can get an indication as to what's happening on our farm. Did we create that seedbed in the wet and cause the problem? Because what we're trying to do is to maintain root hairs. The root hairs are the things that come out and they access the soil and they go out and get our nutrition. And they also harbor and feed in the rhizosphere the microbial community that we're trying to support within our field. And if you pick up a young plant like this and the roots are covered in soil, 9 times out of 10, well 100 times out of 10, you're going to find that that's because you've got good root hairs holding onto that soil. If you didn't, it wouldn't hold the soil, couldn't. So it's a good sign, this. But things can change. If we're trying to avoid this calcium-magnesium sort of situation, which are the two major things in our soils, magnesium soils can make crusted, hard, restrictive, where roots can't penetrate. Whereas we want this lovely aggregate, where air and water can flow, roots can penetrate through to depth. And if they go to depth, they'll get our water that we want in the summer. Now, people often wonder about soil tests and chemical ratios, and it looks complicated, but it is quite simple, really. Calcium has this trait as an element that it causes flocculation. It causes soil to be dry, more air, freer draining, and you see that on a chalk soil. Whereas a heavy magnesium soil would be colder, wetter, drains less oxygen, poor organic matter, etc., etc. And generally, because it's got this attraction, a bigger attraction to water molecules, it can hold a wetter soil. And if you follow some of Dr. Albrecht's and base saturation sort of principles, you probably would have read that we're looking for around ratios of these percentages, 65-75 calcium and 10-15 mag. Basically, you cannot have 100% calcium soil. It will not work. It'd be too free draining. You have to have a bit of mag there. You can't have 100% mag soil because it'd be a lump of concrete, effectively. So you've got to have a balance. And it's deemed that these ratios are the ones that tend to come from good soils and good soils that work. So we've got a benchmark that we can put ourselves on here to see where does our soil fit against these sort of guides. And if we had to do something about this, to take a soil from a looser to a tighter, it's possible. Because if you've got a lot of magnesium floating around in your soil, it's a dominated magnesium soil, and we want it to be lighter because we want our germination of our seeds to be better, more oxygen, we can apply things like gypsum. And just a simple bit of chemistry, calcium sulfate, you apply that to the soil, the sulfate attaches to the magnesium and goes out in the drain water. What's left is your calcium, which makes those aggregates more calcium traits. Yeah? So that's a simple equation, and it would happen the same if you had a dominance of sodium or some other element. I mean, it's not unique to magnesium. It'll take a bit of potash as well, but the principle is there. It will displace and change. So we can make alteration to soil if we think they're out of balance. But interesting enough, these are the basic soil tests that get done in the UK. And as Elaine mentioned earlier, they're very limited in the information they can give us. Generally there's no calcium, no sodium, and they are the basics for cross-compliance. P, K, pH, Mg. And as Elaine said, that's not it. There's a lot more to know. So what the labs do is offer you a bit more. They tantalize you with the extra bit of trace elements, and they'll traffic light code them, red, green, whatever, to say, oh, look, this is dangerous. But certain tests, like if you get excessive iron in a soil, the tests come back there, you can see it in green on the top one there, normal, 900 normal. It's above the guide of 200, quite considerably above, but apparently it's normal. With the previous slide I put up, you could see that iron oxidizes and actually kills the roots. So it's a massive issue to our soil health and seed germination, and weed seeds as well. So we need more information. We can't have a situation where we don't know what chemicals are affecting our soil. Excessive chemicals like iron and the effect on rooting and pH. So we're looking for this good soil aggregates. And you can look at this and see, well, look, active earthworms, I can see them working here. Look at the straw, they're making these little pyramids, these little structures, opposed to another soil that's got no activity at all. That's a good guide about biological activity of a soil. How well is it working for us in our fields? Sometimes you can walk in and you see a pile of stones and think, what on earth's going on there? Well, I put it down to a bored earthworm. You've got earthworms there, but there's nothing for them to eat. So they come up, grab a stone, try to take it down the hole. Oh, I can't get it. It won't fit. So they end up with this pile of stones. So it can tell a lot, just by looking at the way worms work in our soils, it can tell a lot about the health of our soil. What we want to do is create the environment, the correct environment that things can work with. So again, going back to Dr. Albrecht, we need to create the environment, use the correct chemistry, build as close as possible the physical structure, and in turn, this will supply the environment for our biology to thrive within. You can't do it anaerobically. Now, I said talk about the impact of some of these chemical herbicides, pesticides, as you might wish to call them. And we have to be careful that we talk about pesticides as a general term, because within the insecticide and the fungicide market now, we've got biological bacteriums that are cleared by organic association for control of some pathogenic fungicides, and they come within the chemical listings. So if we colloquially call everything a pesticide, we're actually referring to some biological ones as well. So we have to have that differentiation about ones that are artificially created rather than natural. But there's a whole list of the ones in the market for controlling weeds, and they all kind of come into different groups. And most of them work in terms of inhibition, and they work on different things. And the EPSP is your glyphosate that inhibits biosynthesis. But we also have sodium and copper. They're herbicides. Sodium has been used for many, many years at certain rates to control weeds within certain crops. And copper has as well. It was one of the things, I read a magazine on a farm once back, I think it was 1940, newspaper that he had, and had copper sulfate as a weed killer. And it's used by some organic growers for controlling things like charlock and docks. So it is renowned as being a herbicide. So it's not all synthetically produced pesticides that can be in question here. But what we have to think about is whether it is actually altering our food web. And I totally agree with the previous speaker on the food web principles. We have to think about our mycorrhizals, our saprophytic fungi, our nitrogen-fixing bacteria and solubilizing bacteria. They're very, very important for the way we farm today and moving forward. But we also have to think about the impact of what we do on them. And it's not just the herbicide synthetic ones, it's the natural ones. So the impact of these insecticides and fungicides are variable, but insecticides, fungicides, they increase plant biomass and production, organic matter return, because you've got more crop that's living. Increases nutrients removed and demands on soil. So they've got pluses and they've got minuses to some of these insecticides and fungicides. The impact of herbicides and growth regulators, effectively, they decrease organic matter production because they're reducing the weeds. You not have so much organic matter that's going to be returned back to that soil. And that's even the foliage and the roots. So if you haven't got as much organic matter or plant matter, you haven't got as many roots that are exuding food to the soil biology community. So then it's down to seed rates, etc. But the focus being that we have to feed that community. So what we're not looking for is anaerobic soil organic matter. It creates chemical reactions within the soil. Easy way to test is see whether it smells or not. Just get down your hands and knees, whether it be a pasture, grassland or not. You can smell it in grassland. Sometimes I've picked up turf in the top centimetre of grassland. It stinks, absolutely stinks of ammonia. And you think a sheep or a cow has got its nose in that all day. It's not good. So we can learn a lot just by getting down and smelling. But organic matter decomposition may result in phytotoxic and volatile compounds being produced. That, in a definition, is called biofumigation. Now, we hear a lot about biofumigation, and going back to blackgrass for weed control. This ITC from mulching down cover crops is becoming more and more common practice, which I'm not against generally. It's a good process for delivering organic matter as a cover crop or break crop. But it's been purported that it suppresses blackgrass germination, but it also will suppress wheat seed germination. It doesn't specifically target blackgrass. It's producing a chemical that is something that reduces germination within the soil. We also have to think about chemical impact of pH on the half-life of our pesticides that we may use and chemicals. and how that we affect pH in our soils. Because you see here with Fuselade, a common herbicide, it's designed to be pH of 4. But at pH of 4, it's 500-day half-life. pH of 7, it's 150-day half-life. And chlorpyrifos, a nasty insecticide, again, there's massive differences with the pH. How many operators know what the correct pH of their water should be for the product they're using within it? It's not often reported in the UK. It takes a little bit of digging to get that information. Bit of a contentious one, but I'll put it up. But as we go forward with our soils, we often get to this situation where we get poor vigor, slow growth, our crops and wheats looking a bit anemic, spotty, getting more and more take-all year after year. Weeds are getting problematic. What's going on? So what might it be? Have I planted the seed too deep? Is my seed rubbish? Is my seed company just producing me rotten seeds? Or have I got a dry seed bed, poor fertility? What might be the problem? Well, something that was exposed in many years ago. I went to a conference about 5 years ago that highlighted to me as an agronomist, and it shocked me when I heard about it, but it's out there and everybody's contending to it. And that was from our good friend Mr. Huber on glyphosate and the impact that glyphosate may or may not have on our soils. Not only our soils, our whole ecosystem, the way it can affect the fungi. So herbicides can be damaging in some way, shape or form, and we need to look outside the box of what impact that might be having on what we're doing. So the impact of this chemically dependent system will act in different ways, and there's debate on which products and how these products may or may not affect soil biota. Suffice to say that you have there's 4 different ways. You have direct impact, where the thing actually hits the wrong target. Indirect, changes to the environment or the organism around it. So it kills one bug, allows another bug to thrive. Direct and indirect. But also, if you're looking at that on a chart, you have to bring in the elements of short-term or long-term. Is it something that's just going to happen just this once and it'll be fine in a month's time, a week's time? Or is it something, if I keep doing this, I'm going to have a long-term issue 4 or 5 years down the road? Chemical residues or lack of biology. And we see farms that have lost this biology, and we wonder why that's occurred. Sugar beet growers and things, there's just no life to that soil at all over in Lincolnshire and Way. So what's it down to? Might sound all doom and gloom, but due to the resilience of the soil's biological populations to come back is a big part of this. We have to have biological populations that can come back and detoxify our soils. That's what they do naturally. Biology is renowned for doing this. If we look at biological detox, chemical compounds and substances, we'll find that microorganisms degrade and detoxify pesticide residues through many different processes. Composition, physiochemical, all very scientific stuff. But that's what they do. And our soils generally are rich in microorganisms, or we want them to be. So if we encourage our microorganisms, we will help our situation. But we also use humus and clay colloids to form these stable complexes in our soils. That helps as well to tie up that chemistry. Because often with glyphosate as an argument, they say glyphosate doesn't do any damage because it's not found in the soil. Well, it breaks apart. It's no longer the original chemical that was put onto the soil when they do the tests, potentially. So we have to think that it is the bugs that are helping us to keep these soils alive. Now, I came across this, which I thought was very relevant. A natural process which relies on bacteria and fungi plants to alter contaminants as these organisms carry out their normal life functions. It's a word called, I think I've spelled it wrong there, but attenuation. I spelled that wrong there. But it's the natural attenuation, relies on the natural conditions and behavior of soil microorganisms that are indigenous to our soils. But they have to be fed. So within this spectrum, it's back to our feeding and our exudates. It consists of adding nutrients and other substances to the soil to catalyze and neutralize attenuation processes. All right, but then you have this other one, bioaugmentation, which is where you actually give it an injection of biology that might help that detoxification process. And that's used in the petrochemical industry, for instance. So biology's there, it can do the work for us, we need to encourage it to do that work. We need to encourage it by having oxygen within our soils. But there is a limit to these microorganisms and their tolerance within our soils. They need nutrition. They need phosphorus and nitrogen necessary for microbial growth. Their bodies are made up of a 5-to-1 ratio of nitrogen, so they need nutrition to grow. They need moisture content for cell growth and function, and they need an excess moisture can be damaging for this process. But we've also got to think about soil pH. It affects availability of nutrients chemically within our soil if the pH is in the wrong spectrum. And most microbial species can only survive within a certain pH range. So Elaine, this is a slightly different chart to the one that's put up by the previous speaker, but it's saying the same thing. You have a bacterial-fungi ratio, and most plants are tuned to a specific ratio that suits their environment. It just so happens that under woodland, where you get the leaves being dropped, you tend to create more acidic environments. So the fungi tend to prefer a more acidic environment. The bacteria tend to prefer a more alkaline environment. So again, we can choose the crop types that we wish to grow based on our soil pHs. But equally, when we apply a liming material, if we had a pH in the wrong box and you put a product on to change it, it's a massive shift to that bacteria's life or that fungi's world. 1 point shift in pH from a 5 to 6 is a 100 times shift in its environment as a logarithm. So it's a massive change. If we move our temperatures in the UK, our water temperatures, by 1 degree, it's a vast influence on the whole ecology of the world. The sea flows, etc. So we've got to think, when we put treatments to our soil, it's changing our biology dramatically. So we have to use the correct chemistry. Build as closely as possible the correct physical structure to our soils, which in turn supplies the proper environment for the biology. I don't believe personally it's about just spraying biology and everything will be fine. There's a lot of companies that are going to start to try and do this. Even the big ones. As chemicals are being taken off the market, you've got companies like Syngenta who are now producing, they have their own labs to produce biological materials. They're going to produce a proliferation of these materials in the near future to try and recapture the markets that are losing through the pesticide market. But just to spray them on your field, spray them on your crop, is that the answer? It's part of the answer, but if you haven't got the environment to support them with the correct physical environment, as I've been debating, with the correct aggregates, the correct chemical balance, by bringing in the chemistry, calcium, magnesium ratios to our soil, then how is that biology going to survive? Do you start with chemicals? Let's start with the chemicals and let's get the balance of calcium, magnesium right. Well, I've got no biology, so that's no good on its own, is it? But you have to start somewhere. And if you spray biology onto a dead soil, it's not going to suddenly bring it to life because it'll need energy. It'll need some sugars. So if the soil won't grow the plant, where is it going to get the sugars from to develop as a bacterial treatment? So it's it is a circle, and when you get that circle right, it's what we refer to as a balanced system. Chemically, physically, biologically balanced system. And that's what's been coined by many people as phrases around the world, and people work to. So to get the best out your soil test you can, know what's in the bucket before you start. Calcium, magnesium, we have to test these things. We have to know what the sodium is doing. We have to know what the pH is doing. Before we can grow our crop, we have to know whether we can balance these minerals and nutrients. What's the organic matter? Are we trying to trap carbon by increasing more organic matter within the field? What's our moisture content? A lot of things we need to ask questions about. And Lee Briggs' barrel of law of the minimum fits directly into this. So if this is our bucket of soil that we're looking at, where's the point of the weakest link here? We could have tremendous biology, but if our link is broken by the fact we have got calcium-magnesium ratios that are in the wrong boxes, in the wrong ratios, it will not produce the soil that is conducive for germination. So One of the principles we follow is to understand, measure, and use the correct and appropriate chemistry. Soil tests that we undertake, we do measure the total elements of a soil. So if you take the phosphate cycle, if you're trying to measure the available phosphate, you'll do a basic soil test, and that'll tell you you've got an index 2 or an index 3 phosphate in our soil. So it's just like going down to the pub with a wallet full of money and saying, I'm going to buy my wife a dinner or my friends a pint, and I've got this cash to go and do that with. Well, you've either got a small wallet or a big wallet. A small wallet means you can only entertain a couple people. A big, fat, rich wallet means you can grow a big crop, a big tonnage, or entertain a number of people. But if you want to continue the night, when you've run out of that wallet, you have to go to the bank, the cash point, to get more money from your savings. That's the total reserves of a soil. Biology constantly draws from the totals into the wallet. It's constantly doing this. And that's what keeps fertility. So when we measure the nutrient availability fraction of our soil, we're measuring what's in our cash wallet, not what's in the bank. But you won't go out and grow and have that lovely evening with your friends if you're not confident you've got a good bank balance to start. If you're broke, you won't go spending. So to grow 10 ton regularly, or a vast amount of grass to get 7,000 litres of milk on a regular basis, we need to know two things. We need to know we have a good bank balance to support our endeavours for the long term, and we can measure that. Next thing we need to know is, how big's our wallet? Have we got enough cash to go out and spend here to live the life of luxury and get my 7,000 litres each annual, to get my 10 tonnes of wheat? And often than not, the cash point's broken. You go to the cash point, it's broken. Now that's our biology. If you go out thinking you can spend, I've got all these reserves, I've got all this cash, I go out and spend, I've got my 10 tonne, go back to the cash point for the next year's crop, oh, the cash point's broken. I did something wrong with my cultivations, I've done something wrong with my pesticides maybe, I've killed my biology, I've broken my cash point. How long have you got to wait for that engineer to come and fix it? How long before you get that cash point fixed again? Because one process of that slide I put up with the heavy, compacted calcium magnesium soil, where you went out and ploughed it, and I said I could throw my trowel at it, and it bounced back at me, that was within 24 hours. That's how quickly you can damage a soil. That customer in question was driving over that field three or four times with just a plain cultivator with a crumbler roll on the back, and it didn't make a dent in it. The same knobs were going in the front as were coming out the back, but he'd put tons of pressure on the soil in the way to the tractor each time. So that's not the answer. So understand, measure, and use the correct and appropriate chemistry. Create as closely as possible the correct physical structure of your soils. So we've got this vision in our heads what the calcium-magnesium ratio should be. If you're not, there's plenty of guidance online, or we offer it. It's there in text. But it does change a little bit between a sand and a heavy clay. Because a sand, you want more moisture. So therefore, a sandy scenario would want a slightly higher magnesium than it would of calcium, because it's naturally a dry soil. So we want it to hold and retain a bit more moisture. Whereas a heavy clay, we want it to be more chalky, don't we? We want a bit more calcium in there, because it's being dominated by this magnesium. The numbers you're looking at there is 16, 18, 20%. It can get very, very restrictive. And once you get that high mag, you get the lack of air, you get the moisture retention, that's colder, it's wetter, damper. It's ideal scenario for an anaerobic soil. So physical characteristics are great. But can you cure that just by putting in your subsoiler? Or can you cure it just by putting on gypsum? Because many people fall down on that one. They just put, oh, I've seen this in text, I'll throw some gypsum on to move my magnesium. Well, when it does its reaction, where does the magnesium sulfate go? It's supposed to go out in the drainage. But if you haven't got drainage, because your soil is just one massive aggregate, because you've not created land drains or subsoil, then it's not going to work. So our timing of our operations is very important for the way that we can create reaction within soil and displacement of excess elements such as magnesium. And then we need to feed and supply the proper environment for biology. As I mentioned about attenuation, we have to think about feeding the bugs in our soil. That's about using biostimulants in some shape or form, some sort of material that's going to increase photosynthesis of that plant. We're training green leaf area will create more light and water is energy. Energy and CO2 creates sugars, and that's what feeds our soil. And our biology live within this rhizosphere, and that's where we're trying to feed with our exudates. So feed and supply the proper environment is a key part of this. It's not just about putting on a fertilizer bag. And comprehensive soil tests are a key part to that. They're out there. It's just asking for them. And unfortunately, the soil tests don't come cheap because it's using a laboratory to do the analysis. And that uses chemicals, and it's a problem. But know where you're taking the soil test from. As I put on a previous slide between the min-till or no-till and the plough. We've had cases where someone comes in and says, what you've come back with as a result doesn't reflect what I've got in my field. And I said, well, where did you take the soil test from? And where's your problem? He said, well, problem's about 10 centimetres down. And he did a profile soil test. So we've not actually had the soil he's got the problem with. So the soil test has to reflect the soil that you're having an issue with. And that's whether it's 10 centimetres or 20 centimetres down. That's the bit of soil we need to have. And to that end, what we're trying to do is bring Gary Zimmer over. So there's a bit of a plug for a future meeting that we're proposing to do on the 17th, 18th of March. Gary Zimmer is a renowned organic exponent of soil biology. And as part of SSM, in conjunction with a few others, we're going to be having Gary Zimmer over. And you're more than welcome to book your places for that as we move forward. And on that happy note, I'll say thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. I mean, that's I've learnt a huge amount, and I was just reminded of that line from the song about I wish that I knew what I know now when I was younger. So it's come very late in my sort of farming career. But we've got time for, I think, about 10 minutes of questions. So if we've got any of the guys with the orange shirts, have we got some microphones? Some mics that we can take around and just get some questions. If not, I'll come down and do it. Do we have any questions? Questions? Yeah, gentleman at the back.
Hang on, do you want the mic?
Sorry, could you just wait a minute? We've got a...
Just referring back to the total nutrients versus available nutrients argument that the previous speaker brought up.
Yep.
When you measure the calcium-magnesium ratio, what are you measuring?
Yeah, quite correct. As Elaine quite rightly said, the basic test that you'd send to any lab in the UK is measuring the available nutrients. It's using what they deem as being an acid extraction that will represent what biology may do or may not do in the soil. And there can be a tremendous debate on the actual acids that companies use. It's quite strange if you saw Elaine put up, she put ammonium acetate extraction, which is what they use generally everywhere else in the world, apart from the UK, that uses ammonium nitrate. So one can have that debate. And there's also sodium acetate, which is another extraction method used under the Reams system, which is a weaker extraction. Again, saying we're trying to mimic what the soil biology might give off. Okay? The total extraction she's referring to uses the strongest acid that there is out there. You know, it completely flushes it till we get everything off. So it's a true measure of what the soil may or may not hold. Some of what Elaine touched on was actually the total minerals of being if you ground up the rocks. Well, most of us haven't got a lifetime to wait for the rocks to dissolve naturally through biological process. So whilst there might be tons and tons of minerals within a lump of stone, it's not necessarily the bit the root's going to get hold of and grow within the 6 months or 3 months that you're waiting to do that growth in for our crop system. Work we've done in Finland, they have, I was over there last, I think it was January or February, and the permafrost over there is down to about nearly 0.8 of a metre. Now they wake up from that in about April and try and put the potatoes in. So they've got a very quick thaw and a very short window to grow a crop within. So that plant needs its nutrition very, very quickly. It also has to have biology waking up very, very quickly. So they've got a very clear line what they have to do out there. In the UK, HGCA published figures of the foundation phase of growth for cereals, and then the construction phase. Foundation is where it lays down its tillers and develops its root system. And construction is building the tower, the stem extension. And depending on when your plant wakes up after the winter, it's got a short window until about April when it goes into stem extension, March, April. So you could have a very tight window to get the growth you want. So if you come out with a poor germination, poor plant mass, you've got to get that available nutrition into that plant very quickly. So I don't know if that's answered your question fully, but
that you describe in a magnesium-rich soil, or I suppose a calcium-rich soil, those
Yes.
physical effects of drainage or otherwise.
yes, yes.
I'm saying, are they dependent on the soluble minerals or the total minerals?
The
in
soluble.
The soil?
This is soluble minerals. It's the measured bits that are available from the soluble element. But it's influenced by the totals. That's why when you look at a soluble test on its in isolation, it can be misleading, because you could have a tremendously magnesium-dominated soil, but the calcium-magnesium ratio might be okay. So, like going to the bank and the cash point, what you're trying to say is you've got it there, you've got to get the biology working, because you've got plenty of mag in the soil. If you just get the biology working, you won't have a problem with the calcium-mag ratio. So there's issues around it. But that's why it's always good to know the both, to be able to give the right advice. And that's why we persevere with that viewpoint. Okay? So was there one up there? Yeah, the question was about subsoiling in relation to biology and land drainage and chicory breaking open compaction, yeah? At the end of the day, we want air in our soils. If something's hindering that, there's a problem. And you've got to start thinking about where the water goes. So yes, we need to be thinking about land drains, and then you move up the profile. Land drains, mold drains, subsoil drains, cross-latticing, whatever it is. You build your profile. But you can't expect an excess to leave a soil by natural chemical processes if you have not got a drainage route. The only drainage route is across the surface. That's not overly good. We want it to be through a soil profile. Now, yes, chicory and some roots of, taproot material crops have got the ability to break through a compaction, but so have worms. You've got these deep coring worms that will do that. So if you create an environment for the worm by creating the biology to grow the protozoa and the nematodes, but the protozoa that the worms feed upon, then you're creating that environment, you're creating that drainage. You often see a worm cast in a tire mark or in hard soil. So the worms are pretty resilient things. But yeah, if you want to use a tool like chicory, I got no problem with that. And it will go deeper to get more minerals. But the bit you raise about iron is that iron is this ferrous and ferric iron. It lives and works as a water table. When it's in solution, it's ferrous, and it comes up with the water tables, often certainly down in my neck of the woods. And when it comes up, that's all right, but it'll go away as liquid as well. The problem is when it can't go away. And then when its only drainage method is to follow the root hole, the hole the roots made or the worms made within the soil, that slow drainage then gets followed with air, and that's the redox of iron that causes it to give you this rust color within the soil. And that's redox of a soil comes in. That's the chemical electron swapping that goes on with oxygen and chemistry, which biology on its own can't. That is what it is. Biology won't stop that. Biology will help it because biology will cause aggregation to get that water away. But in the short term, iron is a big issue. And yes, we don't want iron accumulating and oxidizing on a root surface if we can help it. Is that okay?
Should more arable farmers, maybe in eastern England, be looking at getting livestock onto their fields for a little biological detoxification every now and then?
Yeah, if it's ever possible. You lack a few fences, though, don't you? I think. But it's a big issue. But the answer is yes. I mean, diversification of farming. I mean, Elaine said we can do monoculture to a certain extent. Yes, if the conditions are right, that's perfectly achievable. But a lot of eastern England's coming from the wrong starting point. We're a long way behind the curve, so we've got to play catch up before we can do this. So again, chemical physical biology, just introducing biology, you've got a bit of organic matter to get into that soil first. And one classic way to do that is to grow a grass. For instance, there's, people go on about buying a brassica as a biofumigation crop, yeah? Well, how many tons of organic matter do you get from that, opposed to sowing some grass seeds and growing it as hay and ploughing the hay in? You'll get a vast amount more roots from the taproot of the bulbous root of the grasses than you would from the taproot of the mustard. That's only got a taproot like that. So organic matter-wise and benefit to land, I'd rather have grass that you plough in. So we advocate spring oats as a winter cover crop rather than brassica, because it's giving a much different type of organic matter material. And it's a grass species, so it's similar to your argument with the grasses. But yeah, grasses would be good, a quick way to bring things back. But if it's grazed down tight, if grasses are grazed down tight, the roots generally only grow the length of the grass above ground. So if you're going to some of the other lectures on mob grazing, it'll be brought out there. If you've got tall grass, you'll have a bigger root system. It's natural that it's going to happen. So if you've got grass on a sugar beet farm in wherever, Lincolnshire, East Anglia, but you're grazing off with sheep, you're not going to have the same root system anywhere near. It's just how you manage that as well. And profit will mean you're probably pushing that pasture quite hard to pay for the grazing, I don't know. But in short, yes is the answer to your question. Okay.
Well, if there's no more, thank you. If there's no more questions, we've got plenty of time over sort of lunch. Kevin will still be around, so I'm sure you can come up and have a chat to him on a one-to-one. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for what, for me, and I'm sure everybody here, has been a very interesting presentation, and given us plenty to think about and take home, and hopefully change the way we farm. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.